You're a woman in the 19th century, and your age plays a huge role in marriage. If you don't marry young, society would gossip and would call you a spinster, which is a derogatory word for older women who are unmarried. But if you live in the 21st century and you are in your late 20s or much later, getting married won't be your top priority. You won't get married until your career is established or until you reach emotional maturity. It's because you think it's the best thing to do. You believe it wouldn't be wise if you're not financially and emotionally ready. But recent economic challenges have made it worse for you, such as the pandemic. So being financially and emotionally ready have become more and more difficult to achieve. Therefore, you've come up with a solution, a brilliant solution, which is don't get married yet. If you live in the early 1800s, you get married and start building a family when you're young. Typically in your early 20s if you're a woman or mid-20s if you're a man. Courtship or dating was a formal family-supervised process that usually led to marriage. Your wedding wouldn't be a grand affair like it is today. It is likely a small ceremony, either at your home or the local church. Basically, practicality mattered more to you than extravagance. But then Queen Victoria's wedding in 1840 changed your perception when she wore white, setting a trend that symbolized purity, a tradition you're still likely to see today. Marriages at the time were often practical arrangements. If you're a woman, marriage was often your path to financial stability and security, since there were few opportunities for independence. If you're a man, marriage meant you're ready to start a family, usually after securing a steady job or career. Providing and protecting your family wasn't as difficult back then. However, if you're a slave, marriage was a much different story. You would avoid getting married on plantations because you might see your loved ones get mistreated or sold away. Some slave owners encouraged marriage to prevent escape, while others cruelly broke up families by selling spouses. Over 30% of slave marriages ended this way, and if you happen to successfully get married, your wedding rarely included formal ceremonies, depending entirely on the master's approval. Fast forward to the 20th century, and you would see marriage starting to shift from those 19th century traditions. Early in the century, you would still have married young, but by the mid-1900s, your reasons for marrying and your timing began to change. In the 1950s and 1960s, love became your main reason to marry. Romantic relationships turned into lifelong commitments built on love and companionship. Marriage now felt like your natural next step if you're in love, especially in Western societies such as the US, Canada, Australia, and many European countries. It was the golden age of marriage. If you lived in this era, there's 90% chance you wanted to marry and get married young. Love was your universal language. Love basically conquered everything at the time. Dating, on the other hand, becomes a bit more enjoyable for you this time because you have more freedom than earlier generations, with love-based marriages becoming your norm. Your wedding ceremony also becomes bigger and fancier. Early 20th century weddings might have been small, but by mid-century, especially among the upper-class citizens, weddings grew into grand occasions with fancy venues. As for what you'd wear, yes, the white dress trend, popularized by Queen Victoria, with styles getting better and better each generation. This is also the century when you as a bride starts to wear makeups as a key part of your look. Your wedding isn't as practical as it was a century ago. Your reception becomes as lavish as it can be, filled with dancing, entertainment, and big feasts. Quite a shift from the simpler affairs of the past. Even though love was now the driving force behind marriage, there were still societal pressures to marry young, especially if you're a woman. Shortly after the golden age of marriage, divorce rates climbed up after the introduction of no-fault divorce in the US in the 1970s. You began questioning yourself whether marriage was truly necessary. Cohabitation became a thing, and you're more willing to live together before tying the knot, marking the beginning of a major shift in how society viewed relationships and family, a shift that continues today. Now in the 21st century, you are living in a world where social media has a massive influence on marriage, dating, and relationships. Platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook have completely transformed how you approach love and weddings. You post and share every moment of your relationship online, from the proposal to the big day itself, often seeking validation through likes, comments, and shares. Maybe you've even seen couples go all out, trying to mimic celebrity-style weddings, all in the hopes of going viral. Influencers and celebrity weddings set the tone, and you might feel the pressure to follow suit, hoping to capture that same attention. Just look at how lavish the wedding of Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt back on the 29th of July 2000 in Malibu. They reportedly spent $1 million at the time, but ended up getting divorced after 5 years. 30 years earlier, on the 29th of July, 1981, Princess Diana's and Prince Charles' wedding in St. Paul's Cathedral in London was hailed as the wedding of the century, which cost roughly $50 million at the time. If you consider inflation, it would have cost around $150 million today. When it comes to tying the knot, you'd likely wait longer to get married. It's not uncommon now to delay marriage into your 30s or even beyond. Why? Because you're focusing on building a career, gaining financial stability, and growing personally before you make that commitment. The pressure to marry young is no longer a thing to you, and now emotional maturity is the key. You might even feel that it's better to wait until you're truly ready. You don't even meet your potential partner in a traditional way anymore. That's now become too old style of dating. It's mostly been replaced by dating apps and online matchmaking. Whether you're swiping on Tinder or chatting on Bumble, algorithms are playing a significant part on your love life, deciding who's compatible with you. Casual chemistry has replaced real chemistry, while matchmaking services promise a deeper connection based on values and lifestyle. But even with all the modern methods, the heart of marriage remains the same. You're still looking for love and companionship. Yet, despite all the social media glam and grandiose weddings, there's a belief floating around that weddings used to mean more back in the day. When you think about your ideal wedding, you're likely imagining a day full of traditions that create a festive atmosphere. Your venue might be a beautiful location, a banquet hall, garden, or church. If you're the bride, you'll most likely be in a white dress, while the groom wears a sharp suit or tux. The ceremony itself will feature you and your partner exchanging vows in front of a religious figure or a civil authority. After that, it's time to celebrate with a reception, where you and your guests can enjoy food, drinks, music, and dancing. And of course, the unforgettable moment wouldn't be complete if it wasn't captured by the photographers and videographers. The idea of the perfect wedding has definitely evolved. If you're planning your wedding today, you're probably more focused on making it unique, something that reflects your personality and values rather than sticking to a cookie-cutter tradition. Luxury touches are more common now than ever. Designer dresses, gourmet food, and jaw-dropping decorations. Your wedding has become more than just a formal event. It's a full-on experience where you want to create unforgettable moments for both you and your guests. But this comes with a cost that most people cannot afford, but a cost you see as justified, for the sake of a once-in-a-lifetime event and experience. In the US, if you're planning a wedding in 2025, you're probably looking at an average cost of around $33,000. Of course, depending on where you are and the choices you make, that final bill could look very different. Let's say you want to get married in a big city like New York. That decision could easily cost you more than $63,000. But if you're leaning toward a more rural setting, you might be closer to spending $16,000. If you think about it, that's already 4 times cheaper. When you break it down, the biggest expenses usually come from the venue and catering, which can make up over 40% of your total costs. On average, you could be looking at $5,800 for the venue and $8,200 for catering. If you're the bride, you're basically the star of the night. It doesn't make sense not spending for a wedding dress and look the most beautiful woman your husband-to-be is going to marry. Therefore, this might set you back around $1,900. Photography costs around $2,300, and videography ranges from $1,500 to $5,000. And don't forget all the extras like decorations, cake, entertainment, transportation, wedding planner, and rings and jewelry. And a celebration wouldn't be a celebration without alcohol. That's another $2,800. If you've been paying attention to prices, you've probably noticed how inflation has driven up the cost of weddings. In just a few years, you'd see the average cost has jumped, and you're not alone in feeling the pinch. About 85% other couples say they're aware of how inflation is affecting their wedding budget. When you look at the numbers, wedding costs have been steadily climbing. In 2023, the average was $35,000, up from $30,000 in 2022, $28,000 in 2021, and $19,000 in 2020. It's clear that inflation and changing expectations have played a big part in the overall cost of your wedding, especially as you opt for a personalized luxury experience. Therefore, if you want to get married now before the price tag goes even higher the longer you wait. Not only inflation, but also social media impacts your decision-making. You've probably seen how platforms like Instagram, Pinterest, and TikTok have completely transformed the way we think about weddings. You're probably not one of them, but 30% of couples use TikTok for their wedding planning. It's hard not to browse these platforms when they're overflowing with ideas for decorations, fashion, and every other detail, making it super easy for you to find inspiration for your big day. On the one hand, this can be a huge help to you. There's so much to explore and you can get a clearer idea of what you really want. But on the flip side, all that exposure to picture-perfect, over-the-top weddings can create a bit of a problem for you. Suddenly, the simple, down-to-earth wedding you had in mind might not feel special enough anymore. Maybe you start out with modest plans, thinking you'll keep the budget around $15,000 for a small venue, basic catering, and just enough decor to make things look nice. But after scrolling through a few dreamy wedding photos online, the pressure kicks in. You see lavish venues, designer gowns, fancy catering, and floral setups that all scream perfection. And it's hard not to wonder, should you be doing more? Before you know it, that budget of yours can balloon to $35,000 or more, just trying to keep up with these high-end, social media-worthy weddings. It's easy to see how social media has inflated modern weddings. You might be drawn to venues that look amazing for Instagram, even if they don't hold personal meaning for you. Catering can become all about gourmet meals that are photographed beautifully, overshadowing simpler, more meaningful options. And if you're the bride, you might feel the pressure to find that perfect designer dress that'll turn heads online, even if it's not really your style or comfort. The constant need to create a flawless, Instagram-ready wedding can make you focus on the wrong things like the superficial details, rather than what your wedding day is truly about. The pressure to have everything look perfect is very real, and it shows in the rising costs of weddings. So, what might start as a plan for a simple, meaningful wedding can easily evolve into something far more extravagant, all because of your desire to match that social media perfect image of what a wedding should look like. The ideal wedding. When the most important thing is making the day about you and your partner, not just the likes and shares. Weddings often come with a lot of unexpected expenses that can throw off your budget if you're not prepared. While you probably plan for the big-ticket items like the venue, dress, and catering, some of the smaller hidden costs can sneak up on you. You may or may not have heard of things like tips, taxes, service charges, and permits, which can get you by surprise in your final tally. For instance, gratuities for vendors, like your caterers, photographers, and musicians, are usually expected, and tipping around 15 to 20% of the total bill is standard. So, if your total wedding cost is $35,000, expect to spend another $7,000 just for tips. In addition to that, you have to pay taxes and service charges, which can range anywhere from 5% to 20%, depending on where you are and who you're working with. If you're thinking about an outdoor wedding or using public spaces, you might need permits, and these can range from $100 to several $1,000s. A sneaky cost you might not think about is the cake cutting fee. Some venues will charge you just for slicing the cake, and while $1.50 per slice might not sound like much, it adds up fast if you've got a big guest list. Ridiculous, right? But the costs don't always stop once the wedding is over. Of course, after spending so much for your big day and for your guests who have a lot to say about your wedding event, the moment has finally come that every couple looks forward to: the honeymoon. While you might have planned for this, the average honeymoon costs around $4,000, but depending on where you're going or what you plan to do, that number can be lower or can climb higher. You might also want to thank your bridal party or family members with gifts, which can easily set you back another $200 to $500. And if you want extra edits or highlight reels for your wedding videography, that can run anywhere from $200 to $1,000, depending on how detailed you want the final cut to be. If you're planning to get married this year, you should at least expect it to be incredibly time-consuming and stressful. If you want a glamorous wedding, you'd want to plan it for at least months, if not a year ahead. You must already know by now that getting everything just right is easier said than done. Finalizing guest lists, people backing out the last minute, getting vendor contracts in line with your goals while negotiating prices, and getting the timelines right. You may think 6 months are enough for planning, but when you're busy dealing with a lot of things, time can really fly so fast. This often leads to decision fatigue because there are just so many options out there. Picking between venues, flowers, and other details can become overwhelming quickly, and coordinating multiple vendors to make sure everything runs smoothly on the big day adds another layer of stress. However, nowadays, it's a no-brainer if you don't hire a wedding planner. Of course, this will be another upfront cost, usually about 6% of your total budget, but it can save you time and reduce the stress of handling everything yourself. Or you might choose entirely something else, something simpler. You may find eloping a great solution to avoid all that stress, or having a micro wedding with just close family and friends. You'll find these options don't take much to plan. They're practical, but it still gives you a meaningful celebration. Beyond the obvious expenses, there are also hidden costs you might not think of right away. For example, alterations for wedding attire can be a big one. It's not impossible if you gain a little bit of weight because of stress eating. Depending on how much work needs to be done, dress alterations can cost you anywhere from $100 to $500. And if you're planning an outdoor wedding, you might need to rent tents, heaters, or other weather-related items, which could add hundreds more to your budget. And don't forget about the uninvited people who show up, the ones that you don't even know. They've just been invited by the invited guests. This can mean extra catering costs, usually around $75 per person. A lot of these hidden expenses get justified in the name of creating your picture-perfect wedding. You might feel the pressure to splurge on designer dresses, luxury venues, or fancy decorations to meet societal expectations or to impress your guests. Social media only adds to that pressure with carefully curated images of perfect weddings setting some seriously high standards. Which brings us to the bigger question: are weddings today more about the spectacle? Marriage has long been seen as a sacred bond, and when you hear vows like, "Till death do us part," or "Through sickness and health," you know those words carry a deep meaning. You're promising to stand by your partner no matter what life throws at you. These vows symbolize loyalty, mutual respect, and a love that's meant to last a lifetime. But let's be real, despite these powerful promises, many couples today find themselves parting ways not long after their wedding. The commitment you make on that big day can sometimes get overshadowed by external pressures, personal struggles, or just shifting priorities as your life changes. In today's society, it's easy for the excitement of the wedding, the dresses, the venue, the party, to outshine the true purpose of marriage. That disconnect between the vows you say and the reality of the relationship can be a big challenge. As a matter of fact, in the US alone, about 2.1 million weddings happen each year, but the divorce rate for first marriages sits around 40 to 50%. So if you get married today, chances are you'll be divorced half of the time. If it's your second marriage, you may think that this might be it. This marriage is going to last a lifetime. But the odds aren't any better, and if anything, it's worse, with 60 to 67% getting divorced. That's 2 out of 3 couples ending up being single and ready to mingle once again. These numbers highlight something pretty obvious, that no matter how much time, money, or effort you put into creating your dream wedding, it doesn't always guarantee a lasting marriage. The concept of marriage has evolved through the centuries, and back in the day, the idea of "until death do us part" was taken seriously, largely because society placed a lot of value on long-term partnerships. If you live in the 1600s, you'll stay married for 19 years on average, but that's not even long, right? However, it's not because people weren't committed, but because life expectancy was much shorter. You were getting married around 24 years old and only living until about 43. If you think about it, that's half of your lifetime. Today, you're living much longer, and it's not surprising if you reach 81 years of age, which means if you marry now and life treats both of you well, you can expect your marriage to last potentially around 57 years. Marriages are so messed up that we don't even know our roles as husbands and wives. Historically, marriage roles were pretty clear-cut. Men were the breadwinners, going out to work and provide for the family, while women managed the home and took care of the kids. If you were a wife back then, you were expected to play a supportive role, helping your husband and keeping things running smoothly at home. But in recent decades, there's been a massive shift. Women have become much more financially independent, with many entering the workforce and no longer relying on men to provide for them. This has caused a major confusion in gender roles within marriages. Some men have even taken on more nurturing roles, which traditionally were considered women's work. You might have heard the term house husband, or you even might have one in your house. This transformation has had a real impact on marital satisfaction. As women become less dependent on men for financial stability, the more they feel they don't need men. This can result in tension, and resentment can build, making the relationship hard to maintain, eventually leading to broken relationship. And with more financial independence, it's become easier for couples to split things up if things aren't working out, which explains the rise in divorce rates in the last half a century. So, while marriages in the past were pretty defined by clear roles and lifelong commitments, today's relationships are more complex. With evolving gender roles and shifting expectations, it's become more challenging to find the person who would be worthy of a wedding ring. And if you're planning to get married soon, as a man, you might need to start thinking about that engagement ring for your proposal. Is a diamond ring worth the investment for your future wife? Let me know your thoughts on the comment section below and watch how lab-grown diamonds can save you up a big deal of money if practicality is important to you. See ya.